Hi, everybody. My name is Garvey, and I use he/him pronouns. I'm an associate professor and program coordinator for a master's program in higher education and student affairs administration at the University of Vermont. I also serve as faculty director for one of the first year learning communities at UVM as well. I want to send a special thanks to Ann Kelly and other session organizers for inviting me to chat with you all about gender and inclusive field facilities. A little bit about me. My research examines college student success, primarily using quantitative methods, with particular attention to uplifting queer and trans collegians. I identify as a quantitative queer and love the tension of navigating post-positivism and survey design and quantitative methods with critical and post-structural queerness. My approach to scholarship and my professional practice is always rooted in positive affect and love, recognizing the grounding and uplifting role of emotions and relationships in higher education. In that spirit, I wanted to send out solidarity and love for trans and queer people watching this webinar. We may not know each other yet, but our stories are so eternally connected, and I feel a deep love and solidarity by sharing this presentation with you all. Throughout the presentation, I'm going to have some brief moments that I call pedagogical pauses, where I'm going to ask you all as audience members to reflect either in writing or in your head about some questions that I posed related to my presentation. To start us off, I wanted to frame our conversation by clarifying some terms. Now, some of these you may be very familiar with, and others may be new for you. So here we go. First of all, gender. Gender is a socio-historically and culturally constructed identity based on roles and attributes given to people. Gender is often based on a person's assigned sex, but I'll get into the intricacies and differences between gender and sex in the next definition. Gender identity specifically is a person's self-conception of their own gender, and performance or enactment of gender is referred to as expression or performance. Typically, when talking about gender, terms that you may hear are man, woman, genderqueer, trans, transgender, agender. And when referring to gender expression, you may often hear words like masculine, androgynous, or feminine. Sex often refers to a person's sex assigned at birth and consists of a person's physiological makeup of themselves. Oftentimes, when we refer to sex, we hear terms like male, female, or intersex. Trans, or transgender, is an umbrella term for people whose gender identity and or expression is different from cultural expectations based on the sex they were assigned at birth. This may also include terms like trans with an asterisk. Non-binary refers to someone who does not identify as exclusively a man or a woman. It may also include terms like genderqueer, agender, bigender, gender nonconforming, genderfuck, intergender, gender fluid, pangender, or a whole other host of non-binary identities. Queer defies boundaries and does not have a clear singular definition because to define what queer is would be a decidedly unqueer thing to do. Queer is predominantly used in reference to gender and sexuality, but that's not always true. Queer is by definition whatever is at odds with whatever is normal, legitimate, or dominant. As Halperin notes, it is an identity without an essence. Cisgender refers to people whose sex assignment at birth and gender identity align with each other in socially prescribed ways. A person who was born male and identifies as a man may identify as cisgender. Genderism or sexism are rooted in the belief that there are only two genders and that gender is based on one's sex assignment at birth. Genderism is often institutionalized as a forced labeling process that sorts everyone into binaries of male or man and female or woman, and assigns privilege to those who conform to the binary gender system and punish people who do not. Transphobia is a range of negative attitudes towards and devaluing and discriminatory treatment of trans people. Transmisogyny is how sexism and cissexism intersect to specifically oppress trans women. And finally, intersectionality is derived from Black feminism and is deeply rooted in social transformation. Intersectionality helps us understand how underlying social inequalities and power dynamics intersect to manifest power and oppression across and within communities. Okay, so here's our first pedagogical pause. I want you to take a moment and reflect on these 4 key questions. First of all, what is your own personal relationship with gender? Second, how do the intersections of your social identities shape how you approach your work? You may be thinking about your race, country of origin, sexuality, gender, ability status, social class, or a whole host of other social identities. I want you to think about how the complexities of who you are shape how you approach your work. Third, how does your personal journey shape how you serve alongside trans colleagues? And then finally, what education do you need to pursue to continue your learning or unlearning about gender? Before we move into some more mechanics about gender and facilities, I want to briefly overview some terms that you may have heard in such conversations. These terms may seem synonymous at times, but there are really important distinctions between all of them. Okay, so first is gender neutral. I typically discourage this name because, in my opinion, no one wants their gender to be neutralized. Folks want to uplift their identities. They want to be seen rather than invisible, in my opinion. All gender and gender inclusive center on gender as a construct and not necessarily on a subpopulation based on a shared gender, whereas trans inclusive refers to a subpopulation based on a shared gender or shared experience. The term trans inclusive, however, may lead cisgender people to not acknowledge the impact of their gender and their gender stories and only singles out trans people. For all of these reasons, I typically use all gender or gender inclusive when referring to facilities and processes. Okay, so first and foremost, why are gender inclusive facilities important? Well, of course, inherently is the dignity, safety, and privacy of every person. Everyone has inherent worth. And our goal is to maximize the value and dignity in workspaces by trying to eliminate as many barriers as possible. Second, gender inclusive facilities have intersectional benefits. Of course, this presentation focuses on how gender inclusive facilities benefit trans and non-binary people. These facilities will also benefit people who are nursing or caring for an infant, people who are caring for another person, people with families or children, people who use wheelchairs or other assistive devices, caretakers for people who require assistance, and couples and partners. Lastly, the importance of gender-inclusive facilities manifests, of course, in the day-to-day and how we access those facilities, but it also signals to people the climate of a space. Policies, procedures, and facilities are really important components of climate. And when I talk about climate, I'm referring to the warmth or chilliness of a space for a specific identity community. The term climate in this context is rooted in scholarship in the 1980s by Hall and Sandler, where they explored the climate of STEM disciplines for women. When you're beginning a conversation about establishing gender-inclusive facilities, there are 4 key components I want you to keep in mind. First, before beginning any conversation about facilities, it's really important to address oppression and harm that has already occurred. Adding all gender facilities will not solve gender-based oppression. So therefore, this effort must be multifaceted and ongoing. If you focus solely on building construction and on record and data collection, you are going to miss a rich opportunity to address gender-based discrimination in your workplace environment. The second important consideration is to involve the community. People want to be heard. It's important to provide a space for anonymous feedback, for feedback where people can share their own personal narratives and stories. You may also consider having a focus group style feedback to promote interactions across people. You may consider feedback based on a specific social identity or position or experience, but be careful not to identify someone who may exist in a group with limited number of people of shared identities. Of course, in all of this, it's really important to center trans and non-binary people. Everyone benefits from gender inclusion, and centering trans and non-binary people uplifts everyone while also making sure those who are most heavily impacted by genderism benefit from this progress. And finally, regarding financial decisions, our values must align with our financial choices. Do not use costs as an excuse. Find other ways to promote inclusion if cost is a prohibitor. Perhaps finding grant money or non-financial ways to promote gender inclusion. I'm going to take another pedagogical pause for you to consider 3 key questions. First, why are you attending this session? Is this something philosophically that's important to you? Is it something that's an immediate need within your facilities? Second, what influence do you individually have to make change? Leverage your political capital, your financial and human resource capital, your experiential knowledge. And finally, what are the potential barriers that exist within your organization, whether it's logistics, financial, or cultural? In collecting information about this session, a number of people had concerns about data, records, and reservations. There are 3 key considerations that I want to emphasize when talking about gender and data. First of all, why do you need gender data? We often collect demographic data, but many times we don't use these data. Data collection can be a particularly harmful process if we are not represented in the surveys that we are taking, which is so often true for trans and non-binary people who are restricted to binary notions of gender and sex. Only include gender in data, records, and reservations if it is absolutely necessary. Otherwise, there is no need to include it. Second, it's really important to differentiate between gender and sex. Key in on terms and do not mix up gender, man, woman, trans, with sex, often male, female, and intersex. Consider which data you need and ask the appropriate questions. Oftentimes, we want to talk about gender and the constructs of power and identity, and not necessarily biological constructions of sex. Methodologically, my favorite trick with regards to gender and data records and reservations is 2 simple, easy approaches. First is including an option that says not listed, please describe. Now, I wrote not listed, please describe because when it says other, it really others someone in the survey design. So we want to avoid the language of other in all contexts. By having not listed, please describe, it provides people whose identities don't fit into prescribed categories to provide their own gender identity. It's important to keep in mind your size of your sample or your data collection or your records, because not only do you have to have a process for collecting these data, but you also have to have an identifiable process of how you will sort and analyze these data as well. The second great technique is the select all that apply approach. Folks may identify with more than one gender, and so it's a gender-forward approach to enable folks to check as many gender options as possible. And again, it's really important that you not only have an approach to collecting these data, but you also have an approach to sorting and analyzing and using these data. Okay, there are 4 key considerations that I want to overview regarding building facilities. First, all gender facilities and accommodations. One approach that you may consider for your facilities is to make everything all gender, and then accommodate folks individually who would rather be in single gender or sex facilities. This is key because it centers trans and non-binary people in this conversation without compromising the dignity, respect, and privacy of others. Your facility may have to have hard infrastructure changes. Some approaches you may consider that won't blow your budget are, if you have a multi-stall bathroom or showers, you could transform these into all-gender facilities by removing signs, adding floor-to-ceiling doors for privacies, and adding doors around the urinals. Having separate spaces in a shared common area is a great approach to retrofitting gendered facilities into all-gender facilities. Third, really important to promote inclusion and not separation. Not all trans people want to be in single bedroom or restrooms. If you have facilities that are cohabitated, consider how you would feel if the only option for you would be to receive separate accommodations from everyone else. And finally, community education is of paramount importance. Our learning is ongoing. Changing facilities will not be an immediate solution, and we really have to promote ongoing education about gender and inclusion. Okay, I'm going to take a pause right here one more time. And there are 3 prompts I want you to consider. First, the red, yellow, green light. As you're listening to this presentation, what is one thing you want to stop doing that you now consider harmful? What is something you want to continue doing that already exists in your professional practice? And what is one thing you want to try new, whether it's a policy, approach, a philosophy, or tangible facilities or reservation modifications? Second, what coalitions are available for you to build to pursue these efforts? And third, what additional resources do you think you'll need, whether it's personnel, financial, or in education? A few final thoughts. First, again, avoid unnecessary gendering. Gender is complex and beautiful. Yet, we do not unnecessarily need to gender facilities or spaces that do not require such a distinction. Second, ongoing and sustaining effort is everything. Terms and identities evolve, how we understand ourselves evolve, and experiences will continue to unfold. In this spirit, I encourage you to also continually seek feedback. Provide multiple avenues and channels for members to provide feedback. Be open to change and listen to people who express discomfort or harm. And also, if you start now, consider longitudinal data so you can track trends and attitudes and experiences across time as you make these important changes. Lastly, exercise humility and gratitude. Particularly for cisgender people, we must exercise humility in what we don't know and express gratitude to trans and non-binary folks who provide open feedback and share their experiences. For cisgender people in particular, do not center on how you're feeling. Instead, let others share their emotions with you without centering yourself. Within higher ed and student affairs, there are a number of scholars who overview topics related to trans inclusion. Zena Galazzo, TJ Jurian are two great people. I've included a number of their publications in here and some other additional resources as you begin retrofitting your facilities to embrace gender inclusivity. Thanks so much.